Think you know everything about this epic Western? From a star punching the director to theme park-style POV sequences filmed for Cinerama audiences, this deeply flawed production hides some of Hollywood's strangest behind-the-scenes stories. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Custer of the West. Fact 1. Robert Shaw literally punched the director. On-set tensions during the making of Custer of the West reached a boiling point in one of the most shocking moments in Hollywood history when lead actor Robert Shaw physically assaulted director Robert Siodmak. The incident occurred during the filming of an elaborate ballroom dance scene that featured 50 couples waltzing in period costumes. Siodmak, who had directed countless ballroom scenes throughout his long career as a film noir specialist, was carefully choreographing the dancers when Shaw suddenly became enraged with the director's approach to the sequence. According to screenwriter accounts, Shaw believed he needed to intervene to give the scene more coherence, but his attempt to take creative control led to a violent confrontation. Shaw ended up punching Siodmak in the face and storming off the set entirely, leaving the production in chaos with dozens of extras in costume and the cameras ready to roll. Producer Philip Yordan had to quickly devise a solution to salvage the expensive scene without their missing star. While Siodmak kept the dancers moving through their choreography, Yordan pulled screenwriter Bernard Gordon from another project to write new dialogue for a minor character that would explain Shaw's absence from the ballroom. Meanwhile, tailors rushed to stitch together a bespoke military uniform for the replacement actor, who rehearsed his lines on the spot. Within minutes, the new performer burst onto the ballroom floor and delivered an improvised apology on behalf of a government minister who had been called away due to a crisis in Washington, then announced an upcoming honor for Custer. It was an admittedly weak narrative solution, but it saved the production thousands of dollars and kept filming on schedule. The incident permanently damaged the relationship between Shaw and Siodmak, leading Shaw to take over directing all the battle sequences himself for the remainder of production. Fact 2. The star rewrote his character. Into a Shakespearean sadist, Robert Shaw took one look at the original screenplay for Custer of the West and decided to completely rewrite his character without permission from the studio or screenwriters. The original script by Bernard Gordon and Julian Zimet was commissioned by producer Philip Yordan with very specific instructions to create a traditional Western hero in the mold of classic Hollywood portrayals of George Armstrong Custer. Zimet later revealed that their assignment was to turn out what he called a typical Western sainted hero martyr script, which they dutifully delivered as requested. However, Shaw had very different ideas about how Custer should be portrayed on screen, especially given that the film was being made in the late 1960s when revisionist Westerns were becoming popular. Shaw believed the character needed much darker shading and psychological complexity, so he rewrote substantial portions of his dialogue and character motivation to transform Custer from a noble military leader into something far more sinister and morally ambiguous. Zimet described Shaw's radical changes by saying the actor figured he would make the character over to suit himself, which he did, turning Custer into a sadist of Shakespearean depth. Despite this dramatic departure from the original vision, screenwriter Bernard Gordon actually approved of Shaw's revisions because the actor was helpful in supporting the writer's own goal of giving Native Americans a fair portrayal in the film. Gordon noted that Shaw was a bright man and a fine writer, who agreed with their point of view that the Indians were victims right to the end, and Shaw even personally wrote one speech for Custer that made this point particularly sharp and clear. The collaboration between Shaw and the screenwriters created a much more complex and controversial version of the historical figure than producer Yordan had originally intended. Fact 3. Robert Shaw actually directed the battle scenes. The production of Custer of the West ended up with one of the strangest directorial arrangements in Hollywood history, with two different people directing completely separate portions of the same film. After the violent confrontation between Robert Shaw and director Robert Siodmak during the ballroom scene, the working relationship between actor and director deteriorated to the point where they could no longer collaborate effectively on the action sequences. Shaw essentially took control of all the battle scenes and military action sequences, directing himself and the other actors through the complicated choreography of cavalry charges, gunfights, and the climactic battle of Little Big Horn. Meanwhile, Siodmak retreated to what he knew best and felt most comfortable with, focusing exclusively on the indoor dialogue scenes and the elaborate ballroom sequences that had been a specialty throughout his long career as a director of film noir thrillers. Screenwriter Julian Zimmett later confirmed this unusual split, explaining that Shaw took care of the battle scenes himself, while Siodmak preferred directing ballroom scenes, which he had done so often in his long career that they required no invention or creative challenge for him. This division of labor meant that Custer of the West essentially became two different films stitched together, with Shaw's gritty and realistic battle sequences contrasting sharply with Siodmak's more traditional and theatrical approach to the dramatic scenes. The arrangement was never officially announced or acknowledged by the studio, and Robert Siodmak retained sole directorial credit despite Shaw's substantial contribution to directing nearly half the film. This bizarre compromise allowed the troubled production to continue moving forward and eventually reach completion, even though it resulted in a final product that often felt tonally inconsistent and disjointed to audiences and critics alike. Fact 4. It was made to replace a canceled Kurosawa project. Custer of the West was actually rushed into production as a hasty replacement for a much more ambitious and unusual film project that never got made. In the mid-1960s, 20th Century Fox had spent several years developing a competing Custer film called The Day Custer Fell, which was set to be directed by the legendary Fred Zinnemann and featured some truly unconventional casting ideas. The most striking element of this canceled project was that Fox had approached several famous Japanese actors who had previously worked with director Akira Kurosawa to play the leading Native American roles in the film, which would have created a fascinating cross-cultural interpretation of this American historical event. Some sources have suggested that Kurosawa himself was originally considered to direct the project, though this claim is disputed given the complicated production history and timeline involved. Interestingly, Robert Shaw was actually among the actors being considered to play Custer in the Fox version before it was canceled. However, the budget for The Day Custer Fell kept escalating out of control, and Fox eventually pulled the plug on the entire production due to cost concerns before filming could begin. When producer Philip Yordan learned that Fox had abandoned their Custer project, he saw an opportunity and moved quickly to capitalize on all the publicity and trade coverage that had surrounded the canceled film. Yordan assembled his own Custer movie using a much smaller budget and filming entirely in Spain to keep costs down, essentially creating Custer of the West as a cheaper alternative that could fill the gap left by the Fox cancellation. The entire production was put together very quickly and made rather cheaply once the Fox project fell through, resulting in a film that felt rushed and underdeveloped compared to what the original ambitious version might have been. Fact 5. Robert Ryan worked for free as a favor. One of the most respected character actors in Hollywood appeared in Custer of the West without receiving any payment whatsoever, doing the role purely as a personal favor to the producer. Robert Ryan, who had built a distinguished career playing tough and morally complex characters in films like The Wild Bunch and Bad Day at Black Rock, happened to be vacationing in Spain while the production was filming nearby. When producer Philip Yordan learned that Ryan was in the area, he reached out to see if the actor would be willing to appear in a small supporting role as Sergeant Mulligan, a deserter who gets captured and faces execution. Ryan agreed to take the part, completely free of charge because he felt deeply indebted to Yordan for reviving his career just 2 years earlier by casting him in the epic war film Battle of the Bulge, which had been released in 1965. That role had brought Ryan back into the spotlight and reminded Hollywood of his considerable talents at a time when his career had been struggling. The character of Sergeant Mulligan in Custer of the West serves very little narrative purpose in the overall story, appearing only in one extended sequence where he has a philosophical conversation with Custer the night before his execution. Despite Ryan's powerful performance in the scene, critics and audiences noted that the entire subplot felt disconnected from the rest of the film and could have been removed without affecting the main story. However, the sequence gave Jordan an opportunity to feature a major Hollywood star in his production without having to pay the typically high salary that an actor of Ryan's caliber would command, and it allowed Ryan to repay the professional debt he felt he owed to the producer who had helped restart his career. Fact 6. It features Disney-style theme park ride sequences. Custer of the West contains 3 bizarre action sequences that feel completely out of place in a historical Western because they were specifically designed to give Cinerama audiences the sensation of riding a theme park attraction. Cinerama was a special widescreen filming process that used deeply curved screens to create an immersive viewing experience, and the producers wanted to take full advantage of this technology by including extended point-of-view sequences that would thrill audiences. The first sequence shows 2 men tied up in a runaway wagon careening down a steep mountain road with no horses, filmed entirely from the perspective of someone riding in the vehicle as it hurtles toward disaster. The second features a soldier escaping from a Native American ambush by clinging desperately to a log as it races down a water flume, with the camera positioned to make viewers feel like they are plummeting down the rapids themselves. The third sequence involves a train carriage that becomes unhitched and rolls uncontrollably toward a burning trestle bridge before crashing spectacularly. Each of these sequences goes on for several minutes and brings the narrative to a complete halt while audiences experience what essentially amounts to a roller coaster ride. Critics and viewers have noted that these scenes have absolutely nothing to do with advancing the story or developing characters, and they could be removed entirely without affecting the plot in any way. The sequences were clearly inserted solely to showcase the Cinerama format and give audiences visceral thrills, but they ended up making the film feel disjointed and gimmicky. Ironically, most audiences never got to see the film in the Cinerama format it was designed for, as it was primarily exhibited in conventional, widescreen theaters where these elaborate sequences lost much of their intended impact. Fact 7. Real-life married couple died tragically young. The 2 lead actors in Custer of the West were actually husband and wife in real life, and both would die under tragic circumstances within a few years of each other while still relatively young. Robert Shaw and Mary Ure had married in 1963 and had 4 children together by the time they filmed Custer of the West in 1966, with Mary portraying Elizabeth Custer opposite her real husband's portrayal of General Custer. The on-screen chemistry between them was genuine, and audiences at the time found their domestic scenes together particularly touching because the love they portrayed reflected their actual relationship. Mary Ure died first on April 3, 1975, at the age of 42, just hours after the opening night of a stage play called The Exorcism in London. Her husband, Robert Shaw, discovered her body when he returned to their Mayfair apartment from a filming break. The official cause of death was ruled an accidental overdose, resulting from a mixture of alcohol and sleeping pills, though at the time there was considerable speculation in the press about whether it might have been intentional. The couple had been experiencing difficulties in their marriage, with Shaw having an affair with his secretary and Mary struggling with alcohol dependency. Robert Shaw was devastated by his wife's death and never fully recovered from the loss. He died just 3 years later on August 28, 1978, suffering a fatal heart attack while walking on a country road in Ireland at the age of 51. Shaw had continued to struggle with alcoholism throughout his life, much like his father before him, and the stress and heartbreak following Mary's death likely contributed to his own premature death at such a relatively young age. Fact 8. A descendant sued for $25 million. The film's extremely negative portrayal of one historical figure led to a massive lawsuit from a family member who felt his ancestor's reputation had been unfairly destroyed. Charles Reno, who identified himself as the grandnephew of Major Marcus Alfred Reno, filed a $25 million libel lawsuit against both Security Pictures and Cinerama Releasing Corporation in October of 1968. In the film, Major Reno is depicted as an incompetent officer with serious character flaws, portrayed by actor Ty Hardin as a hard-drinking and insubordinate soldier, who fails Custer during the crucial Battle of Little Big Horn. Charles Reno's lawsuit specifically claimed that the filmmakers had portrayed his deceased relative as a coward, a drunkard, a traitor, a criminal, and a murderer, arguing that this deeply damaging portrayal constituted libel against the family name. The real Major Marcus Reno had already been a controversial figure in American military history, having faced a court of inquiry after the Battle of Little Bighorn, where his actions and decisions were questioned by his superiors and fellow officers. However, Charles Reno argued that the film went far beyond historical debate and crossed the line into deliberate character assassination that damaged the family's reputation and honor. The lawsuit highlighted the ongoing controversy surrounding what actually happened during Custer's last stand and who bore responsibility for the catastrophic defeat that cost the lives of over 200 soldiers. The historical record shows that Major Reno did retreat to defensive positions during the battle rather than supporting Custer's advance. But whether this constituted cowardice or sound military judgment, given the overwhelming enemy forces, has been debated by historians for over a century. The ultimate outcome of the $25 million lawsuit is not well documented in available historical records. Fact 9. The film used the wrong weapons. Entirely, one of the most glaring historical inaccuracies in Custer of the West involves the weapons carried by the cavalry soldiers, which are completely wrong for the time period and actually change the entire context of why the battle ended so disastrously. Throughout the film, the troops of the 7th Cavalry are shown carrying 1873 Winchester repeating rifles, which were indeed in wide civilian use by 1876 when the Battle of Little Bighorn occurred. However, these Winchester rifles were never issued to United States Army soldiers during this period, making their appearance in the film a significant historical error. The real soldiers under Custer's command were armed with the 1873 Springfield trapdoor carbine, which was a single-shot weapon that required the soldier to manually reload after every shot. This limitation was a crucial factor in understanding why Custer's forces were so quickly overwhelmed by Native American warriors, many of whom had acquired repeating rifles through trade or capture from previous battles. The difference between these two types of weapons is enormous in terms of combat effectiveness. A soldier with a single-shot Springfield carbine could fire perhaps 10 to 12 rounds per minute under ideal conditions, while a soldier with a Winchester repeating rifle could fire 15 rounds without reloading and maintain a much higher rate of sustained fire. Some military historians have speculated that if Custer's men had actually been armed with Winchester repeating rifles as shown in the film, it is possible, though still unlikely given the overwhelming numbers they faced, that they could have held out long enough for reinforcements to arrive. By showing the cavalry with superior weapons they never actually possessed, the film inadvertently makes their defeat seem less understandable and removes one of the key tactical disadvantages that contributed to the historical disaster. Fact 10. It was released under different titles. Custer of the West had a confusing release history that saw the film distributed under multiple different titles, depending on the market and the version being shown. In addition to the original full-length version that ran approximately 2 hours and 23 minutes, distributors created several shortened versions of the film that cut out significant portions of the story in an attempt to make it more commercially viable after the initial roadshow presentations failed to attract audiences. These abbreviated versions were released under the alternate title, A Good Day for Fighting, which was taken directly from a memorable line of dialogue spoken by the character Chief Dullknife in the film. The phrase appears near the climax of the movie when Dullknife confronts Custer before the final battle, and the distributors apparently felt this more action-oriented title would better attract audiences than the straightforward historical title, Custer of the West. The decision to release multiple versions with different titles created confusion among moviegoers and made it difficult for audiences to know which version of the film they were actually seeing when they purchased tickets. Some theaters showed the complete roadshow version, while others screened the shortened cut under the alternate title, and there was no consistent standard for how the film was presented across different markets. The use of multiple titles was likely a desperate attempt by the distributors to salvage some return on their substantial investment, after the film's initial release proved to be a commercial disaster. This practice of retitling and re-editing troubled films was relatively common in the 1960s, when studios and distributors tried various strategies to recoup losses on expensive productions that failed to connect with audiences during their original theatrical runs. Fact 11. Spain doubled for Montana, OBE, badly. Despite telling the story of events that took place in Montana and the Dakota Territories, not a single frame of Custer of the West was actually filmed in the United States. The entire production was shot in Spain, with most of the filming taking place within 30 miles of Madrid, and the climactic battle of Little Bighorn sequence filmed near Almería on the Costa del Sol. This decision was made purely for financial reasons, as filming in Spain was significantly cheaper than shooting in America during the 1960s, and producer Philip Jordan had already established connections with Spanish film studios through his previous epic productions in the country. However, the Spanish locations looked nothing like the actual American landscapes where these historical events occurred, creating a jarring disconnect for audiences familiar with the geography of the American West. The rugged Spanish mountains and arid desert terrain bore little resemblance to the rolling plains and grasslands of Montana and Dakota, and critics were quick to point out how unconvincing the substitution appeared on screen. One particularly glaring problem was a lengthy desert sequence that takes place in terrain that simply does not exist anywhere near the actual Little Bighorn battlefield, forcing viewers to either accept the geographical impossibility or have their immersion in the story completely broken. The New York Times review specifically criticized the quality of the Spanish locations, noting that the mountainous plains in Spain were no substitute for the standard glimpses of classic Western territory that audiences expected, and that not a single shot looked as though it had been photographed in the American West. The unconvincing locations added to the film's overall sense of inauthenticity and contributed to its reputation as a cheaply made production, despite its relatively substantial $6 million budget. Fact 12. It was the first Cinerama releasing corporation. Film Custer of the West holds a unique place in cinema history as the inaugural theatrical release from Cinerama Releasing Corporation, making it the film that launched this new distribution company, even though it turned out to be a massive commercial failure. Cinerama Releasing Corporation was established specifically to distribute large-format epic films using the Cinerama process, which featured a deeply curved screen and special projection technology designed to create an immersive viewing experience that would compete with the growing popularity of television. The company had high hopes that Custer of the West would establish them as a major player in the film distribution business and demonstrate the commercial viability of the Cinerama format for future releases. The film was one of two big-screen epics produced by Security Pictures specifically for Cinerama presentation, with the other being Krakatoa East of Java, which would be released the following year in 1968. To finance these ambitious productions, Security Pictures borrowed $6 million from the First National Bank and entered into a complex arrangement with Pacific Theaters and Cinerama Corporation that involved multiple companies sharing distribution rights and financial stakes in the films. The American Broadcasting Company eventually took a 50% interest in both Custer of the West and Krakatoa East of Java during the summer of 1967, providing additional financial backing for the troubled productions. Unfortunately, launching a new distribution company with a film that received largely negative reviews and failed to attract audiences was a disastrous beginning for Cinerama Releasing Corporation. The poor performance of their first release damaged the company's reputation and made it much more difficult to secure financing and distribution deals for future projects, setting a troubled precedent that would haunt the company throughout its brief existence. Fact 13. It features a bizarre 50-star flag anachronism. Among the many historical inaccuracies in Custer of the West, one of the most glaringly obvious involves the American flags that appear prominently throughout the film, which feature the modern 50-star design despite the story being set in 1876. The 50-star flag that appears in the movie was not officially adopted by the United States until July 4, 1960. After Hawaii became the 50th state the previous year. This means the filmmakers were displaying a flag design that would not exist for another 84 years after the events depicted in the film, creating an anachronism that spans nearly 3/4 of a century of American history. The historically accurate flag for 1876 would have featured only 38 stars, representing the 38 states that comprised the United States at the time of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Colorado would become the 38th state just 1 month after the famous battle, making the timing particularly significant for anyone paying attention to historical detail. The flag is featured in multiple scenes throughout the film, including important ceremonial moments and battle sequences, making it impossible for attentive viewers to miss this glaring error. This type of mistake is particularly puzzling because obtaining or creating an historically accurate 38-star flag would not have been difficult or expensive for the production, especially given the $6 million budget they were working with. The use of the modern flag suggests either a shocking lack of attention to historical detail by the filmmakers or a deliberate decision to use the contemporary flag because they assumed audiences would not notice or care about the difference, which demonstrates a certain level of disrespect for both historical accuracy and the intelligence of the viewing audience. Fact 14. The unusual UK first release strategy. Custer of the West followed a highly unusual release strategy that saw the film premiere in London rather than in the United States, which was extremely rare for an American Western about such an iconic moment in American history. The film had its world premiere in London on November 7, 1967, a full 2 months before it opened in the United States in January of 1968. This backwards approach to releasing an American historical epic was so uncommon that it immediately raised questions about the producer's confidence in the film's ability to succeed with American audiences. Typically, films about American subjects with American casts would premiere in major U.S. cities like New York or Los Angeles to generate domestic buzz and reviews before expanding to international markets. The decision to launch in the United Kingdom first suggested that the distributors were nervous about how the film would be received in its home country and wanted to test the waters in a foreign market where expectations might be lower and audiences might be less familiar with the actual historical events being portrayed. The strategy also may have been influenced by the fact that the film's 2 lead actors, Robert Shaw and Mary Ure, were both British performers who had stronger name recognition in the UK than they did in America at that time. Another factor could have been the complex international financing arrangement that involved British, French, and Spanish production companies alongside the American producers, which may have given the European partners more influence over the release strategy. The London premiere turned out to be a preview of things to come, as British critics gave the film largely negative reviews that foreshadowed the poor reception it would receive when it finally opened in American theaters 2 months later. Fact 15. It made only $400,000. Despite a $6 million budget, Custer of the West stands as one of the most spectacular financial disasters of the late 1960s, earning back only a tiny fraction of its massive production budget and leaving its producers deeply in debt. Security Pictures had borrowed $6 million from the First National Bank to finance the production of Custer of the West, along with another epic film called Krakatoa East of Java, gambling that both films would be successful enough to repay the loan and generate substantial profits. However, Custer of the West earned only $400,000 in theatrical rentals from its combined United States and Canadian release, which represents the money that theaters paid back to the distributors after keeping their own share of the box office receipts. This catastrophic return meant that the film failed to earn back even 7% of its production costs from the North American market, not even accounting for the additional millions spent on marketing and distribution. The financial failure was compounded by the fact that the film received largely negative reviews from critics, earning only a 25% rating on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 4.1 out of 10. The poor critical reception made it nearly impossible to generate positive word of mouth that might have saved the film from complete commercial oblivion. The disaster had serious consequences for everyone involved in the production, damaging the reputation of Cinerama Releasing Corporation right from its very first release and making it much harder for producer Philip Yordan to secure financing for future projects. The film's failure also contributed to the decline of big-budget Western epics in Hollywood, as studios became increasingly reluctant to invest large sums of money in historical Westerns after seeing how badly Custer of the West performed at the box office.